Do you want a world where Les Mis is interrupted by boos because somebody just feels like that's their moment? I don't. This is where conservatives don't do that. We don't interrupt the show.
Welcome to The Conversation. I'm Dasha Burns, White House Bureau Chief for Politico. Every week on this show, I invite one of the most compelling political power players in for a chat to find out how they're navigating and shaping this incredible era of American politics. Today, I'm joined by Richard Grenell, special envoy to President Trump. Grenell wears many hats in the Trump administration. When he's not acting in his capacity as a diplomat, he's running the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., and doing, as he told us, whatever the president asks him to. We spoke the morning after the center's opening night of Les Miserables, where he sat next to Melania Trump, a close friend of his. Our interview also took place a few hours before Israel launched military strikes on Iran, and we talked about those rising tensions. Plus, I asked about his experience navigating cultural politics as a gay Republican. Here's our interview with Ambassador Richard Grenell. Ambassador Richard Grenell, we're at the Kennedy Center, the place you're overseeing. Thank you so much for joining us.
Welcome to the Kennedy Center.
It's beautiful,
Yeah,
and you're trying to make it more beautiful.
Well, it's a little bit aging right now. I mean, if you look too closely, you'll see needs some tender loving care, paint.
A little TLC.
The back of the house is really bad in terms of the AC and the boilers. We've got to fix it. Actually, the person who's in charge of this building has been here long before me. Really, we had the discussion of whether or not it should be gutted or torn down and start over. It's that bad. The deferred maintenance here is just truly atrocious, and we're so far behind. But I think we're going to get it fixed. We got a chairman of the Kennedy Center board happens to be the president of the United States, who also happens to be an amazing developer. And
a big fan of the arts.
And a big fan of the arts. But when he walks through here, more importantly, he can tell like the soffits, and he understands the engineering.
I mean, let's talk about that. You had your first major opening night at the Kennedy Center here. The president was here, so many cabinet members, First Lady. How do you feel it went?
I mean, look, we raised a little more than $10 million. We truly have some great new patrons that are coming that didn't feel welcome before. And so I think this is a place that we want to send the message that everyone's welcome. This is not just an arts left organization, but that all voices are able to come here and be a part of it.
Well, it's interesting because last night you did have cheers for the president. You also had some boos. You had some drag queens show up. And there was that element of protest in addition to support of President Trump. How do you feel about that mix? Was it disappointing to have some of the protests on opening night, or is that what you want to see?
No, I mean, look, I think we want people here who sit next to each other who voted for somebody completely different for president. You could have somebody sitting next to a Trump supporter who also voted, somebody who voted for, Bernie Sanders. No one gets vocal and no one gets into an argument because we're watching Les Mis. That's the whole idea of tolerance. And I think the media have to do a better job of understanding what this place was before. And I think that now it's much more tolerant because for the longest time, conservatives didn't feel welcomed here. Look what happened when J.D. Vance came. He comes here and he gets booed. Now, do you think conservative organizations are going to do that to the left? We don't do that.
Well, I think they're in this hyper kind of polarized time.
Well, give me an example where they do that. I don't think that's true. I think the intolerance is coming from the left. And look, as somebody who understands the left, I live in Los Angeles. I got a lot of friends, close friends who are on the left. They're sick of it too. The majority of people on the left have realized they keep losing elections because they are known as the intolerant party. Look what's happening in Los Angeles. People are furious that you're enforcing the law.
We'll talk about LA in a little bit. I think most people, though, can agree in this time there's intolerance very much on both sides. But I hear what you're saying about spaces like this.
I lived through the cancel culture of the Biden administration where people like me got debanked because we were on the outside of a political issue. That's unacceptable. No Republican is trying to debank a Democrat right now. We're not trying to cancel people. We're trying to enforce the law. And we want tolerance. We want a place like this to be I want everybody. You brought up drag queens. If they're an adult drag queen, they're welcome to come here. I think it's amazing because we are the premier arts institution for America, and everyone should be welcome. No one should be booed. No one should be banned. And by the way, it wasn't us who canceled anybody. It was the left who ran out of here with their fingers in their ears. Look at Hamlet.
Banning and booing are kind of two different things. I mean, there is an emphasis on the right on First Amendment rights and the right to free speech and
Yeah.
anti-cancel culture, right? So
Yeah.
shouldn't people be able to boo and to protest as long as they're not, getting violent or...
Well, okay, so let's go there. I'm all for having your First Amendment rights. I will go to the mat for making sure that you have your First Amendment rights. But do you want a world where Les Mis is interrupted by boos because somebody just feels like that's their moment? I don't. I think that your
Not in
moment...
the middle of the performance, but...
Right, exactly. There needs to be some sort of decorum. And this is where conservatives don't do that. We don't interrupt the show.
Was the show interrupted when Vance came, or was that just when he entered? Because I think for both Trump and Vance, it was like when they came in, there
Well,
was
I think
some
that-
hubbub.
I think the hubbub is interrupting the shows. You can see it. But this is my point. When we had Lin-Manuel and his...
Lin-Manuel Miranda and the Hamilton folks,
right.
yeah.
When his whole push to say, I can't be here, Hamilton cancels at the Kennedy Center. Why did he do that? He did that because he's intolerant. He doesn't want to perform for Republicans. Don't forget, when Vice President Pence showed up at one of his shows, the crowd booed. People on stage, made faces and comments to him. So that's the world that I don't want to live in. And the intolerance from the arts community is one of the worst. I just watched the Tony Awards, and the number of times on the Tony Awards where they talk about give everyone their voice, be tolerant, we want to be diverse, but you show up as a Republican and you get booed. They're literally the most intolerant people, and that's what we are not going to have here at the Kennedy Center. Everyone is welcome. Everyone is welcome. But our programming is going to be common sense and be geared towards the public.
To the programming point, because I think there's the art and then there's the reaction to the art. We've been talking to kind of the art world response, but art so often is meant to challenge authority,
for sure. I love
right?
it.
Challenge the people in power. Is there room for that still at the Kennedy Center in the Trump years?
Oh, I think you're seeing the evidence of the people pushing back and taking over. This is the era where the voices of tolerance have arrived, the voices of people who challenge the system. It's the system. It's the power players who have controlled this place for the longest time. They're the ones who are screaming that they don't want the people
So you see
coming.
yourselves as the revolutionaries in the
Absolutely.
Les Miserables
We're the people. We're the
plot.
people's voice.
Doesn't everyone see themselves as the rebels,
Well,
as the people?
Well, I would say there's maybe, and I think that's a really good question. And I would say that the public and the media need to evaluate which voice is more of the people, which is the elite voice, which is the voice of intolerance, which is the voice of cancel culture. And you all decide. And that's one of my problems with the media is I think you all have to do a better job of talking about the facts and challenging the people who are the voice of every man, because I think that we are. I think when you go to a Donald Trump rally, you will see working class, first and second generation Americans. This is one of the things that I really have a problem with. You've seen me on Twitter talk about the Democrats in California. They're pushing hard on interchanging immigrant with illegal immigrant. They interchange those two concepts. And that's not something that I think is acceptable. I think that what we're trying to do is enforce the law, go after sanctuary cities, which is this cute name for a horrible undermining of the rule of law, where you say you get to come to this city and we won't enforce the federal immigration laws. I don't think that's acceptable. I think that undermines the rule of law. And their interchanging of immigrant from illegal immigrant is offensive because we love immigrants. This country is founded on immigrants. We need immigrants, but we need legal immigrants, not people jumping the line.
Well, and I think there is some conflation right now, too, on the part of those enforcing immigration. We've seen some folks get caught in a system that aren't illegal immigrants or that aren't criminals, but the fear and the chill factor is
Well,
there.
you just did something that was interesting. You said that aren't illegal or criminals. I think that if you break the law, and you enter this country illegally or overstay your visa, you're now
I think the reason I said that is because the way that the president has talked about it was really a focus on criminals that have committed like serious crimes,
okay. So
like
now we're talking
sex
about different
trafficking.
levels
Right,
of
right.
crime. I still think if you break the law in this
And if you're
country,
illegally, you should be out.
first of all, I ran a visa department at the embassy in Berlin and our consulates in Germany. So I understand the visa line, and I understand the foreign service officers who are young first tour, second tour foreign service officers who sit behind that glass and they make some really tough decisions about the person on the other side. And the decisions that they make is, is this person allowed to come into our country? Do we give them a visa? You look at the data that the fingerprints give us, and sometimes the data is good, sometimes it's incomplete. So you ask some questions, and you're trying to get a feel for whether or not you're going to overstay your visa and stay in the country illegally. Many times they make the best guess possible, but they are wrong because they didn't have enough data or the person is a phony on the other
Well,
side.
let me ask you this. Just before we sat down, the president posted this to social that I was kind of surprised to see. He said that our great farmers and people in hotel and leisure businesses have been stating that our very aggressive policy on immigration is taking very good long-time workers away from them, with those jobs being almost impossible to replace. He said we must protect our farmers, get the criminals out, but changes are coming. What do you think is going on there?
Well, look, I understand this process from an
I
embassy
mean, you're a
standpoint.
Californian. You know how important some
Yeah,
of
but more
those.
importantly, I ran a visa program. And so there is this process that you get a visa or you get permission from the United States to come in for a temporary status. Temporary workers are important to our economy. But the idea is you got to follow the rules.
Well,
We're
why
not
do you think farmers and hotel folks are complaining to Trump about the way that the enforcement is happening right now in this moment?
because we have so many people jumping over the line, cutting the line, and illegally entering our country that we have to crack down in order to stop that portion. And in doing so, the legal process for temporary permitting has been decimated because we need to be able to understand if you're going to come in here as a temporary worker, that you come in, you work, and then you go home.
Sometimes you have to break it before you fix it.
No, I don't think that that's the case because I think there's still people who are getting temporary worker status. But my point is that the process needs to be followed, the legal process. And we've had too many people illegally jumping the line and coming into our country where it's flooded the system. The State Department, for instance, we sit there constantly and try to judge someone to give them a visa. Meanwhile, they could just skip the line at the State Department and go to Mexico and get right in. So
Though it seems like now that's pretty much shut down at this point
Correct,
under
thanks
this
to Donald Trump.
administration. Let me ask you about what's going on in LA because you've been very outspoken on social media about this. You know, we have these different images of what's going on. You do have some peaceful protests, but you also have cars on fire. You have folks assaulting law enforcement, and there has been a serious crackdown from the Trump administration, sending in National Guard, sending in the military. The White House, as I've been talking to my sources there, feel like this is political gold for the president. But do you think there's some political risk for President Trump when you see a city like LA look kind of militarized?
Look, I think people are going to be surprised when they hear me say this, but I think you know this is true because you know me a little bit more. I'm a policy geek. I really like policy. And I'm trying to dig in and understand deep policies. And so I'm less about the political spin. I don't know who's saying that. I don't know what ads they're talking about. I certainly understand there are people who are concentrating
But I
on the
guess, do you think
midterms.
this is politically good for President Trump, or is there political risk?
Look, I always think that it's a good thing when people enforce the law and don't undermine the rule of law. I have been extremely outspoken in California and other places of how the idea of sanctuary cities is a terrible thing. It undermines our democracy. It is an attack on our rule of law. The very people who complain about undermining the rule of law are the cheerleaders for sanctuary cities. A sanctuary city is literally, as I said, a nice term for a safe haven to break federal immigration laws and not be enforced. So I don't think that it's cracking down when you enforce the law.
Well, but there are different ways to enforce the law, right? You
Okay, so
can.
let's talk about enforcing the law, because I didn't hear you sitting with people saying, "Why are you pushing for sanctuary cities? That sounds like it's undermining the rule of law." We had a whole media that was super comfortable with cheerleading sanctuary cities and
Oh,
talking
I'd be
about how
happy to ask
nice.
Democrats that question when I have someone sitting in front of me.
I'm saying for 4 years before, we sat silently as the media cheered sanctuary cities. Now we're in the point where the media are saying, "Oh, you're cracking down too hard on sanctuary cities." Well, where were you when they were like
I don't think
flourishing?
that's not, I'm not saying the crackdown is too hard or not. That's not for me to decide, but it has been uh, a response that's stronger, certainly compared to in 2020. I know the president had considered National Guard, considered military, and didn't go there. This time, that's very different.
So my reaction would be you criticize him no matter what. And so he's going to
It's
have
not,
to.
it's not critical. I'm just asking.
When the enforcement is 0 and you go to 10, it seems like a whiplash. So all I'm saying is if anyone breaks the law in our country, no one is above the law. No one, even if you're a Democrat.
But is it a good look to have military on the streets?
I would say this as somebody who lives in Los Angeles and who just lived through the fact that many of my neighbors who voted for Democrats went to the back of their yard when a fire was racing up the hill. They turned on the water and there was no water to stop it. So I would say that there is zero confidence in Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom right now from Democrats. So yes, do we have faith as riots are unfolding in the federal government more than the local government? You bet we do. We're thankful that Donald Trump came in. I think Donald Trump saved Los Angeles because it was clearly heading towards riots of weeks on end, which we've lived through in Los Angeles. So when Donald Trump decided to send in law enforcement and send in the National Guard and send in the military, there are a lot of Democrats in California who said, thank God, because Karen Bass isn't cut out to be a leader.
Is all of this, from the fires to the protests, is this pushing you closer to a run for governor?
Look, I talked to the president about this yesterday.
Ooh, dish.
I'm not going to dish.
Disappointing our listeners here, Rick.
But look, I'm a Californian. I, have been pushing this very unsexy idea of voter registration for about 5 years. We've done a phenomenal job with very little media attention. I didn't want media attention on it. We've been under the radar. But, I will tell you, last year alone, we registered 200,000 brand new conservatives throughout California. We won races that common sense politicians shouldn't have won, but not for our voter registration drive. I believe that even Democrats in California are tired of the radical regime that's in place. It's a one-party rule, and you and I talk about this all the time, but it's my criticism of California playbook, Politico. You can't have a one-party system like California, like Sacramento, and have reporters that just cheerlead the Democrats because they want to have access.
I don't know that there's
I know
cheerleading.
I know that, and
I would push
I know
back
you
on
have to
that.
defend your colleagues, but I have to tell you, it's atrocious of what's happening with California playbook. Anyway, I've talked to the leaders about that. I hope there's a change coming.
I know you've got a lot of criticism for a lot of us in the press, which is why I appreciate you still sitting down, because it's important to have these conversations, right?
It is.
Especially as you are seeing California for a long time, whether you're in the media or you're in the public, or even if you're a Republican here in Washington, you see California as the bluest of the blue states. But do you think that there is an appetite for a Republican governor, whether it's you or someone else?
First of all, I want to thank you for always having a nice conversation. You're one of the toughest people because you can take my criticism and dish it back, and I appreciate
skin,
that.
And you have the thick skin too.
Yeah, I like it. I actually think we should have debates and conversations more. I want to see if Kamala runs. If Kamala runs, I think, there's a whole bunch of Republicans who are going to have to take a look at it, not just me.
But that's going to potentially determine your
No, it's
decision,
not
or
gonna
have an influence on your decision.
Yeah, it's going to have an influence. Here's the thing. If she runs, it's going to make me have to take a look at it. Right now, I'm not running for governor. I don't want to run for governor. I think there's a lot of work to get there for a Republican, which is why I've been traveling the state. I don't get paid a penny to do this. For the last 5 years, I've been traveling the state, raising money, trying to make a difference on voter registration. Roughly 50% of society, just roughly, is not even registered to vote. Out of the 50% that's registered, about 40% actually show up. So our political system is geared towards
I've thought about this for a long
the
time.
40% that show up is only a smear, a small number compared to the people in our society. So I believe that in California, the people sitting on the sidelines who are apathetic, who hate government, who think it's a waste of time, I think they're all common sense conservatives, whether they're registered Democrat or Republican or decline to state, which is our third, I don't want to tell you how I'm going to vote.
I think more and more of those are
Yeah,
are
mind
coming
your own
around.
business. Don't come into my life. I think those people want common sense policies. And so what I'm trying to do is find the common sense voter and get them registered wherever they register. And we believe we're making a huge difference. That's extremely unsexy. It's
But
not,
can have an impact.
it's having a huge impact. And so that's been my focus. I'm not running for governor. What I'm saying is if Kamala...
But you're not ruling it out. Let's be clear.
Absolutely not
Okay.
ruling it out. If Kamala runs, we have spent $1 billion to define her as stupid. She gives us gifts every day when she talks because she can't put a sentence together. She doesn't understand policy. And so there's a built-in messaging already. Her reputation is so low in California with the public, not
You think
Democrats.
Harris will give Republicans the best opening?
I think Kamala would win the Democratic primary and lose the general because common sense voters in California know she is ill-equipped to lead the state.
You are not running for governor as of this moment, but you are doing a whole lot of other things. So I want to talk to you about your role as special envoy, because that's your other title in addition to heading up the Kennedy Center. What is that role? What are your priorities there? What is your mandate as special envoy?
Whatever President Trump gives me, and that can change.
How often do you get those calls?
Too often.
Okay.
Just kidding. And not too often enough.
Please keep calling, Mr.
Exactly.
President. Right?
Look, I didn't ask for this job here to be the president of the Kennedy Center. But I do it when the president asks. The president is taking on a lot. He's a change agent. He is somebody who doesn't sleep, has an idea a minute, and he needs people on the field helping him. And so I've said whatever he asks me to do, whether I like it or not, I'm going to do it for these, years that he's in office.
You've been a foreign policy advisor for him for a long time. Last time I interviewed you was at CPAC.
Yeah.
And we talked about Ukraine, and you were pretty tough at that time on Zelensky and his leadership. Has your perspective on the conflict changed at all since Russia has escalated and really doesn't seem like they're looking for peace here?
I believe in diplomacy. And to me, diplomacy is not weak. Diplomacy is an aggressive middle ground of bringing two sides together. If you're going to be a good diplomat, you got to listen to both sides. You don't make judgments. You have a goal, like in this particular situation, of peace. If your goal is peace, a lot of people are going to criticize you because you got to force the two sides into the middle. So what I would say to that is Russia is clearly the problem here. And we have to be able to get to them and have a nice conversation with them and say, what do you want? I don't think that talking to Russia is weakness, which a lot of people do. A lot of people criticize when you talk. We saw a lot of criticism from political people and the media when we had a conversation with the Russians. We didn't see that same criticism when the United States had conversations with Ukraine. It was just, wait, why are you talking to Russia when I think the answer should have been, we just talked to Ukraine, now we're going to talk to Russia. Once you get both sides to tell you what's their bottom line, what's their absolutes, then you can craft kind of a conversation together.
But
We're not there
when
yet.
one side seems to not be so earnestly interested in peace? Does Trump need to turn the screws a bit more on Putin?
No, what I would say is if you've done diplomacy in the quiet moments of talking to one side, you know that it's not as bleak as what their public statements are. You know it's not as bleak as what the media wants.
You think there's more hope than people think with Russia and Ukraine?
But that conversation is my point with the Russians right now. We've got to figure out, what do they want? What can we do? What can we try to sell? once you can get them to the table of even trying to find a 30-day, 60-day ceasefire, and I think one of the issues on the ceasefire is that the Russians don't want to see the Europeans rearm Ukraine if there's a ceasefire, of just giving them a break and then getting more arms there to regroup. And I can understand that. If we're going to have a ceasefire, we need to stop. It needs to be a real ceasefire so that talks can exist, not to have one side rearm and get caught up. It's like in a fight, and somebody gets hurt, and you immediately stop the fight, and then everybody gets rested. The other side's like, wait a minute.
President Trump said that he could end this war on day one, right? Why do you think that we haven't yet figured out what does Russia want? Is that tenable? Like, why have talks not moved further along when the president made that day one promise?
I think there's an easy answer to that, is that Biden made it way worse. He didn't talk to Putin. It got deep. It got aggressive. And by the time we got into power, by the time President Trump got into power, the situation was completely different. It was all about war, Dasha. There wasn't a conversation about peace. There weren't even peace meetings during the Biden administration.
The president, though, now seems like he might be close to walking away. He's kind of signaled that at some point he might give it up. Do you think he's serious about that? Is that a negotiating tactic? Like, would he seriously consider abandoning this altogether?
Look, I think that there's a fundamental difference between the private conversations and the public maneuverings.
And that's all you'll say about that?
Yeah.
There is reporting, I want to ask about some news. Israel is preparing an attack on Iran, and it's coming at this really sensitive moment when the Trump administration is trying to strike a deal to curb their nuclear ambitions in Iran. How dangerous is the situation right now in the region and with the U.S.?
Well, look, I think it's extremely dangerous because Iran has a lot of money. The Biden administration gave it tens of billions of dollars in sanctions relief, cash, credit. So when you have a regime like Iran funding Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, it's a very dangerous situation. And I think that we have a real problem for the next 10 to 15 to 20 years because Iran is so flush with cash. We've got to figure out how to dial that money back, because this is a regime that has demonstrated when they have cash, they have terrorism. And so it's an extremely dangerous situation. But I believe that President Trump has a very good relationship with the Israelis, and the Israelis don't want to act alone, and they need to be in close coordination with the United States.
You've talked about your identity fairly publicly. You're a high-profile, out gay man in the Republican Party. This is a moment where there has been sort of a right-wing cultural backlash to Pride Month. We just had World Pride here in D.C. last weekend. Some refocusing on same-sex marriage. You've been navigating Republican Party politics as an out gay man for a long time. Do you think it's gotten easier or harder?
I spoke at a Pride event just a couple of nights ago to the International Trade Group for Gays and Lesbians, the federal government. We had an amazing conversation about this exact topic. I did the March on Washington in 1993. I don't even know if you were born yet.
We won't talk about that.
Okay. And I remember marching on Washington. It was our first big gay rights march and movement. And I remember what we were calling for back then. It's fundamentally different now. And so what I believe is that the gay community has to police itself.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, you go to a pride parade, and it's embarrassing, to be honest.
What about it is embarrassing?
It's real fringe, and it's too sexual. And I think that we have to start critiquing ourselves. And by the way, this is extremely popular with normal gays. The more I talk to normal gays about this,
what's a normal gay?
It's not a radical gay that says that 6-year-olds should have their boobs cut off or get hormone replacement therapy. Look, I think the reality is that we have to have normality. That's what we were fighting for in 1993. We kept saying, we're normal. We're just like you. We just love somebody that of the same sex. Now I think, and this is an extremely controversial statement, but I believe it wholeheartedly.
Rick Grenell, controversial, shocking.
I think that we have largely achieved equality in this country for gays and lesbians. And I think that the gay left knows that. And so therefore, they're coming up with new gimmicks and fringe stuff to keep the money flowing and to keep the power going within the Democratic Party. If you are within the Democratic Party as a gay person, What you've brought to the table is organizing efforts, money, and votes in the past. That's all fallen apart. You see normal gays voting for Donald Trump, for Republicans. That's been happening for years. And so I think it's time for the gay and lesbian community to police itself. We should not be having children exposed to adult entertainment. That's what's happening in some of the pride parades. Now, look, I'm no, prude. I like some of the fringe art stuff. I won't go into, some of the programming here in the past that I think was pushing the limits in a good way.
That's what art's supposed to do,
That is
right?
what art
Yeah.
is supposed to do. But for here at the Kennedy Center, we can't do niche programming like that unless we have the money. And we literally have not had a proper budgeting and funding to be able to do the extra stuff. We got to get back to the basics, do the big stuff, have the popular stuff that brings people to the seats, and then we can reach out and do arts education. I believe in arts education, but you got to have the money to do it.
There is an element of the religious right in particular, though, that I think sees this issue very differently. Just on Tuesday, the Southern Baptist Convention voted overwhelmingly to call for the overturning of the Supreme Court ruling that legalized same-sex marriage. They're looking at what happened with Roe v. Wade and kind of trying to apply the same model. There's this hunger culturally on the right and parts of the right to try to make this an issue again. Is this a conversation that the Conservative Party should be having right now?
Sure. I mean, I don't see any problem with it. This is part of the political process. People believe different things. I grew up evangelical. I have ministers in my immediate family who don't always agree with me politically on a variety of issues. But I'm not afraid of those conversations. If they think that this is an issue and they want to bring it forward, I can disagree with them and say Republican Party is for smaller government, and we can have that debate, but we need to do it in a way that's respectful. I'm not threatened by that. But let me give you an example. In the first Trump administration, President Trump asked me to run the decriminalization of homosexuality campaign for the Trump administration. And this was not gay marriage. This was not pride parades. This was about decriminalizing homosexuality in the 69 countries that criminalize it. And there were 9 countries that will put you to death for being gay. And we just thought that wasn't right, that we needed to have a campaign just to decriminalize it, not to go further. And when we did that, and when we articulated that this was a group coming together to make sure that it wasn't a criminal act around the world, we had people like Mike Pence, we had evangelical pastors joining us. We also had people like Stuart Milk, Harvey Milk's nephew. And so I think that there's a way for common sense to make some progress, and it's not simply about this, fringe pride parades that are really embarrassing a lot of gay people. When they go to them, they're just uncomfortable with the sexual nature of it, and it's a parade which is designed for like kids.
But you personally, as you see the Republican Party start to look at things like overturning same-sex marriage, that right,
Let me challenge you. The Republican Party is not doing that.
Parts of the party are.
There's a conversation with people who believe that those issues should come forward. I'm okay with having that conversation because I believe we've moved on from that, and that Republicans are going to.
Do you think the party should move on from that?
It's not an issue that the party is dealing with. I think there are certain people in the party that want
But
that
I think
conversation.
that stuff starts to creep, right?
I don't think that we should
grow
crush
in-
the conversation. Let's have the conversation, because I believe that the evidence shows that we've moved on, that it's not a serious issue. Now, coming back to what I think normal gays should be doing, which is critiquing our own movement. A lot of these issues are coming back because of the overreach of the gay left on trans issues and children's issues.
You think it's a backlash?
No, I think that it's an overreach from the gay left because they have been losing on the other issues. Again, I go back to, I believe that we've largely achieved equality, that it's not a wedge issue like it was before. So what happens is the gay left sees that they're losing their power, come up with a new idea, which is like, let's now do trans everywhere. It's about money and power for them. And I think because they've overreached, the Democratic Party is like running away from them. You see this, biological men in sports is like an 80-20 issue now. And so I'm really proud of the gay conservatives and the normal gays who have been at the forefront of protecting children, protecting women's spaces in sports, protecting bathrooms, and not overreaching, but just saying, look, a normal gay just wants to work hard, love who they want to love, and participate in America. And I think that's the majority of people in this country.
You've said a number of things, I think, in this interview that will have some people clutching their pearls. That's kind of your thing a little bit. You're a diplomat, but you also, I don't even think you would describe your approach, certainly not online, as like diplomatic in the traditional sense. You're brash.
No, I think that you have. I would disagree with you. I think first of all, I'm a very nice guy. Twitter's not real life. I like conversations, and I think that.
Do you like poking the bear, though?
No, I think that living in Los Angeles, I'm surrounded by people who are very smart and very left, and none of them try to cancel me. We have good conversations. We go to dinner and we have really electric conversations. That's life. I like that. I think it makes me sharper on policy issues. It makes them think if you can calmly do it. But I want to challenge you on the idea, the definition of diplomacy, because I think too many times we've gone into this world where diplomacy is about weak, Gucci-shoed people who know restaurant culture. And I don't want that.
I think there are a lot of diplomats listening to this that would take offense to that.
I would push and say there's a lot of diplomats that I know at the State Department who are dying to be crisis diplomats at the forefront, solving problems, who don't want to be known.
You think diplomacy as in general has lost its way, has gone awry, or the idea of it?
Of course, because the President of the United States, he or she needs to have two people in front of them for any crisis around the world. The Secretary of Defense, who doesn't negotiate, and the Secretary of State, who does, who says, we're not going to let the Pentagon do something yet because we have sanctions, we have tariffs, we have visa restrictions. We have a whole bunch of leverage of the U.S. government to be able to be really aggressive to make sure we don't have war. If you don't want war, you better have really good diplomats who are tough, who are not just sitting in Paris at some restaurant, sipping on wine. You need to have people who are crisis-driven, who go into danger posts. And I would argue the Foreign Service is filled with those people. They want to solve problems. They don't want their embassy to be evacuated. They want to be there.
I want to come back to the Kennedy Center for 1 second because we talked about the finances. And I know one of your big mandates here is to revamp this place. You need money for that. At the same time, there's been a lot of reporting that ticket sales are down, that subscriptions are down for, here you go, pulling out your folder.
Your people told me that I needed to move this. And I said, no, because I know this was coming.
Figures, but
no, look, that's fake news. And let me just tell you, the Washington Post came out with an evaluation saying ticket sales were down compared to last year.
Well, Reuters also said theater subscriptions are down 82% for next season. Is that wrong?
That's the same thing. No, it's the same thing as the Washington Post. It's wrong. The comparison is what the Washington Post and Reuters and the New York Times and everybody just kind of repeated what the Washington Post analysis said. I'm going to give you this letter from our CFO, which outlines the whole thing. So first of all, they compared last year to this year, and we released our programming a month later. So they didn't even have a month's of our revenue. They didn't include certain other areas that weren't included yet because we started a month later. And also, this is our first year where with subscriptions, we are letting people not just do a take it or leave it subscription, like here's your subscription to the Kennedy Center. Now you get to click on what do you want. You get to create your own package. So it's really apples to apples, not a same comparison. It's apples to oranges. So you
Excellent.
got that.
We will dig into this.
And I also want to give you from our senior vice president the statement that also reiterates all of the problems with those numbers as well.
Ambassador Grenell always comes prepared.
I want to deal with facts.
Les Miserables last night, you were with Melania Trump as
Yeah.
well. I know you two are
One of my
close.
favorites.
What about Melania? Because she's not in the public eye nearly as much this time. She wasn't that much last time either, but she's got this air of mystery about her. What do you think people don't understand or don't know about Melania Trump that they should?
Well, look, she's not a political person. She's an iconic fashion, successful model and businesswoman. And she's been thrown into a brand new world. And I think, there's two problems. One, political people don't understand her world, don't understand her. And the fashion world is so intolerant that they can't report on Republicans at all. And so I think she is incredibly strong. She's funny. She's not only beautiful,
She's
but
funny. I don't think we've seen the humorous
she's
side of
very
Melania
funny.
in public.
She's very funny and witty and quick, and a smile that can melt people and make you very relaxed. And so we have a nice friendship, and I like what she does to President Trump.
What do you mean by that?
He's a strong guy, but I see somebody who can absolutely break through everything with him, and it's Melania.
Ambassador Grenell, thank you so much. I think we talked about more than I expected today, honestly. Thank you for sitting down, for digging into all of this with us, for having the conversation with me.
Well, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much to Richard Grenell for joining the conversation. You just heard us talk about the situation in Los Angeles. On Thursday, a federal judge ruled against Trump, saying he can't send in the National Guard. An appeals court has since put that ruling on hold. So for now, Trump is still in charge of the National Guard there. But California Governor Gavin Newsom has been leading the fight to stop him. Newsom has called the president's actions illegal and authoritarian, while Trump has accused Newsom of letting LA descend into chaos and agreed with his border czar that the California governor could be arrested. In the middle of all this, I called up our senior political reporter, Melanie Mason, who's been covering the situation in LA and interviewed Governor Newsom this week. Here's my conversation with Melanie. Melanie, thank you so much for joining the conversation.
Thanks for having me.
You've had quite a week, a lot of reporting, and you spoke with the governor of California, where a lot has transpired over the last week. So first of all, how did your conversation with Governor Newsom come about?
He's here in Los Angeles, and so I had asked his team, hey, is he going to have a press conference? Is he going to have a news avail? And instead, I just got a phone call.
Directly
they were ready.
From him?
Yes. They were ready to go. They really were flooding the zone when it came to putting the governor out there. And that, of course, led up to his major address that, got primetime coverage, at least out here in California. But I think that there was really this sense from the governor's team, if there was going to be any sort of focus on California, that he was not going to let there be a news vacuum. But I think it's also just worth noting, as we're all watching Gavin Newsom, that he wanted his name and his face and his perspective out there in as many forms of media as possible.
He is seizing the moment, in other words.
100%. Yeah.
So Newsom just calls you directly. Not that hard to get him on the phone, it sounds like. What was the conversation like? What was the tone? What did he say?
He was coming in hot. This had happened just about an hour after President Trump was asked if it'd be a good idea if Newsom was arrested. And immediately he starts talking about how this is the markings of authoritarianism. I mean, I think that he really kind of immediately jumped in with the rhetoric. Newsom likes to also be kind of a wonk. Interestingly enough, I think that people think of him as this kind of showboat, but he actually likes to flex some policy chops. So when I was asking him about his lawsuit, he was like walking me through, like, here's the exact code that we think that Trump is violating, and here's the wording of his executive order. Like, he actually likes to sort of get down in the nitty gritty details. But I would say that then he very quickly pivoted back to this much more sweeping rhetoric, calling the president unhinged, calling him immoral. This is, again, somebody who has kind of tried to calibrate his relationship with the president on and off, especially when he's trying to, say, get resources for wildfire recovery from the president. He doesn't always try to have this antagonistic relationship, but there was no sense that he was like holding back.
It's interesting that he's become sort of the symbol of the resistance, given over the last several months, he's actually gotten some flack from people on the left because he's been going against the grain of the Democratic Party on issues of trans athletes and immigration. How did you see this this pivot kind of in his messaging and in his branding in this time?
Look, I think that nationally, there's always been this sense that Gavin Newsom is this like super liberal San Francisco mayor. I mean, he came to the national scene back in 2004 when he, legalized gay marriage in the city of San Francisco, way out ahead of the courts and, of course, most of the Democratic Party. So I think that he's always been seen as, part of the left flank of the Democratic Party. The truth is that he's always been ideologically slightly more nuanced than that, and it's always been a bit more complicated. He usually has been pretty deft at sort of that paddle to the left, paddle to the right that we often see, even with California Democrats. It felt clunkier in the last couple months. And so doing things like hosting Charlie Kirk on his podcast or Steve Bannon, his comments about trans athletes, it felt like he was obviously trying to cast himself towards the middle, towards the center after the 2024 elections in a way that I think really alienated the Democratic base. And so what we're seeing now is he's back in the pocket, right? He's back in the mode that he likes to be in.
In talking to the Trump White House, they're pretty gleeful still at the Democrat response and thinking that the Democrats are playing into their hands by taking what I hear is like the 20 side of an 80-20 issue. But on the Democratic side, it feels like there's a bit of a relief to just see somebody step into what has been largely a void of voices and deliver a message that is resisting Trump in a way we haven't seen.
I think that the advantage that Governor Newsom has is that something concrete is happening in his state, in California, and he has a concrete response to it. It's not just shouting into the void or sort of making these rhetorical flourishes. He responded in the courts, and TBD on what the sort of outcome of that will be, but he's trying to block Trump's sort of military intervention here. And he's responded with these speeches. He's responded being on the ground in Los Angeles. And so I think for Democrats who have mostly been seeing their members of Congress shouting into the wind, it feels like, without being able to pull any levers of power, because the truth is they don't have very many levers of power right now. Just being able to see somebody actually take on an oppositional role that's not just somebody looking like they want to inject themselves in the conversation, I do think that Democrats are relieved by that.
You live in LA, you report out of LA. Give me a sense of why Los Angeles was sort of the first spark in this fire.
First of all, I don't think it can be overstated how much immigrants, both legal and people who are not here legally, are just embedded into the culture and the fabric of this city. And so when you started seeing these enforcement raids, the chill immediately took effect. I mean, there were people who were just not going to work for fear of being picked up, for fear of being profiled. I mean, even people who are in the country legally, I think, just thought this is too risky for us right now. And I think that the ripple effects are really vast. Los Angeles and California more broadly has this sort of symbolic import that is far beyond sort of what we are geographically. California has always just played this outsized role in the national imagination. And I think that that is absolutely what's playing out here. So you have the second largest city in the country, the home, I think, of so many immigrants, both legal and not legal. And also, look, I think that it's not coincidental. This is also where Stephen Miller is from.
Let's not forget that. Yes. And he has been extremely vocal in all of this, of course.
Yeah, I feel like his social media presence has really ramped up during this moment. And of course, this is an issue that he's so passionate about, right? This is his signature issue. But I don't think it's a coincidence. When he's describing Los Angeles, I believe he described it as like this balkanized place now. I mean, he's talking about his hometown. And so I do think that there's this sort of personal element, both coming out of DC and then how it's felt personally here, that just makes this thing that much more combustible.
How do you navigate reporting on an issue that is so layered, right? Because you do have peaceful protests. You also have some people that are rioting or setting cars on fire. You've seen the images. You have all of this heated rhetoric from the right. You have the left saying that there's nothing wrong. Don't look here. Some people trying to tack to the middle. Like, how do you, as a reporter, when you're trying to accurately and fairly describe like what is actually happening, how do you navigate?
The thing I keep thinking about is the sort of cliche, but it's like two things can be true at once, which is also like a very hard thing, I think, to capture in coverage, but it's also the most accurate, which is that here is a true thing. There have been some violent scuffles. There has been property damage. There have been cars that have been set on fire. There have been images that have been cast out of Los Angeles to the rest of the world that I think people are rightfully kind of horrified by because it's destructive. That being said, I got a lot of text messages from friends who live outside of Los Angeles, like checking in on my safety. And I wanted to be like, I cannot convey to you how normal things are right now. I mean, the scale of Los Angeles as an area is so vast, and the area where the actual scuffles are happening is so small. And I think that what's difficult for Democrats in particular in this moment is that if they want to emphasize more the peaceful protests of it all, if they don't want to give fodder to Trump's pretext for why they needed to escalate this military intervention, they want to emphasize the more like low-key aspects of what's going on here, or at least non-destructive. And yet, what are the images that are going to be airing on TV all the time? It's the Waymos that are on fire. It's the people looting the Apple Store. And it looks like they're losing credibility when they say, nothing to see here. There are bad actors in here who are doing bad things that should be stopped. But the idea that this is something that is going to require military takeover to get a handle on, when Trump says that homes in Los Angeles would be burning like they were burning in the wildfires from January, I think that most Angelenos here would say, I don't think that that reflects my personal experience right now.
I do know from the White House perspective that summer 2020, the protests following the death of George Floyd are looming large in their minds because Trump feels like he was talked out of a greater show of force during that time, and now he wants to come in early and make an example out of Los Angeles so that this doesn't happen in other cities. I wonder how in California for Democrats who I think did get some backlash politically after the defund the police movement came out of George Floyd and some of the other more progressive policies that we've now seen voters reject. Like, do you get the sense that Democrats are thinking about summer of 2020 as much as the White House is, and in what way?
Absolutely. And I think that if you actually listen to the messaging that you're hearing from Democrats up and down sort of every level of office, the first thing that they say is these protests have to be peaceful. If you do anything violent, you're going to be arrested. You have to be held to account for that. And I think that that was not so much the tone in 2020. I think there was a lot more reticence to even talk about any law enforcement response. The LAPD has been arresting dozens and up to hundreds of people now when they're doing things like violating the curfew that the mayor put into place. And what we're not hearing from Democrats is we don't want LAPD involved, which was kind of, I think, the tone 5 years ago. In 2020, first of all, these demonstrations happened all over the city, and there were violent sort of vandalism in places like Santa Monica, and it felt just so much more like this could come and happen anywhere. And also, look, like it was the middle of the pandemic. It was just such a bizarre time. I think that now, yes, you do have these sort of instigators that are coming out at night and who are, smashing things up because they want to do that. But I think that what you have instead is this day versus night contrast, where in the daytime you have these very peaceful protests that have a lot of faith leaders. You do have elected politicians at these types of things. And then the question is at night, can they get things under control before things kind of start to go crazy and you start to see those images that Republicans, I think, are pretty gleeful about.
All right. Well, I think you walked us through so much, especially for those of us who aren't in California witnessing this firsthand. Melanie, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
This has been The Conversation with Dasha Burns. We'll be back next week. If you want to catch future episodes of The Conversation, be sure to click that subscribe button below. Thanks for watching.